All right, here we are, middle of March already, March 16th.
Welcome back.
Yes, having a beautiful spring day in Yuma.
Oh, we are.
Of course, most parts of the country call this a summer day because it's supposed to be up around 90 today. And to most people, that's summer. That's in Yuma,
like
that's
it.
spring.
I like it.
And it's not even technically spring yet. It's another week yet before it's
Yeah,
spring, and we're already
June.
hitting around 90 degrees. So
But daylight saving
But,
time started.
Yuma's known for its warm weather, and I'll tell you, 90 degrees in Yuma is wonderful.
It is.
All right, well, let's get back into the book of Genesis. We left off at the end of chapter 36 last week, talking
Yes.
about Esau. Just briefly discussed him because he is an offspring of Abraham,
Yeah.
although he wasn't of the chosen lineage, but still God blessed him and did some tremendous things through
Yeah.
him.
He's
But,
the father of the Arabs,
Yeah, well,
Arab nation.
actually Ishmael was the father of the true father of the Arab nations, but Esau carried it on. He
Yeah.
was involved in that area too. So, but now we're going to get into chapter 37, talking about Joseph. And most of the rest of the book of Genesis is focused on Joseph.
All about Joseph.
I love the story of Joseph. Joseph is a good example to follow. You know,
He is.
we've looked through here and we've talked so many times about how nearly everybody in here, and we've talked about, is messed up one way, done some dumb things. It's hard to find much wrong with Joseph, much
Just like
that
all
he's
of us.
done wrong. He probably didn't use a whole lot of wisdom when he was sharing the dreams God gave him with his brothers, who already hated him. But he was only 17 then,
Yeah.
so I guess
We
you
cut
can
him some
kind of
slack.
excuse him, yeah. But anyway, at this time, Joseph is 17 years old.
Yeah.
We see real quickly here that he is the favorite son of his father, which causes a lot of problems. Again, we've talked about this in the past. When you show favoritism, when it's obvious in the family, and especially when it's favoritism not based on what do you want to call it, on merit, because obviously if you got one child that's rebellious and doesn't want to help, doesn't want to do anything, and you got another child that's very obedient and does what they're told and tries to do their best, you're going to show some, give some more latitude to the one that's the obedient one, probably give them more privileges and whatnot. And the other one may not like it, but I'm sure they understand. But if it's just because, well, in Joseph's case, it was because he was the first son of Rachel, who also was his favorite, which he made very obvious too,
Yeah.
that Rachel was his favorite.
Yeah.
So he makes Joseph this special code. It's, different interpretations say it calls it a coat of many colors. I think in this NIV it says made him an ornate robe for him. Today, maybe he bought him an Armani suit or a tailor-made suit or something, while the others had to wear hand-me-downs and so forth. But anyway, so that's one of the reasons. Also, Jacob brought some bad reports about his brothers. Apparently his brothers could be scamps at times, could get into trouble, and Joseph, was told his father about it and said, tell him, well, just kind of tell them what's going on. And so they're not, his brothers are not the least bit fond of Joseph. And then he has a dream.
Yep.
He's out in the field. In this dream, he's out in the field. And in those days when they cut down the wheat or barley or whatever grain, they'd cut it down with a scythe, and then they would tie it up in bundles called sheaves. And he said when they was out in the field tying up their sheaves, said his sheaf stood upright and all their sheaves bowed down before it, before his sheaf. And of course, that really made him upset. Said, "You're gonna rule over us?" His brothers, verse 8 says, his brothers said to him, "Do you intend to rule over us? Will you actually, or to reign over? Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he said. Then he has another dream. And again, sometimes we need to use wisdom about who we tell our dreams and our plans to. People, especially if they don't like you,
Yeah.
or if they think you're nothing, and don't put any stock in you. Sometimes it's best not to share your dreams with them because they
You
can
have a lot of
discourage
wisdom.
you. Well, again, like I
This
say, he
time.
was 17 years old, and he's probably
Yeah.
excited about what God's doing. But anyway, he has another dream, and in this dream, it says the sun and the moon and the 11 stars bowed down before him. He tells this to his brothers and his parents, or at least his dad, and
That didn't make his dad
but
feel
yeah,
real
his
good
dad
either.
wasn't too happy about it. It says when he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream you had? Were your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. So Jacob, he pondered it. He thought about it. Maybe this is something that God's showing him. But even he's not too crazy about this idea of, first of all, he's number 11 in the son, so he's way down the list as far as being in inheritance and so forth, and yet he's having these dreams. And it's interesting that in these dreams all God shows Joseph is him reigning. He doesn't show any of the problems that he's going to have to go through. A lot of times God will show us things that are going to happen in the future, but he doesn't always show us what we're going to have to go through to get there. And sometimes we get discouraged because, God, I thought you told me I was going to do this or that, and it seemed like all I've had is just trouble. It seemed like things are getting worse, and it doesn't. God's dreams and God's visions don't always take place just immediately.
Very seldom do.
Yeah, very seldom do. God spoke to us probably 12 years before we went into full-time ministry, but that we were going into full-time ministry. But we had 12 years of ups and downs, before finally it came about. And so don't get discouraged if God's shown you some things, or you have some things in your heart that you want to do, and it doesn't happen immediately. Things don't go the way that you expect them to. Sometimes, we have our idea of how things are going to work. God's going to do this and this, and within a few weeks or a few months, I'm going to be running the world, whatever it is that God shows you. But like I say, it usually takes some time, and that's what we find out here with Joseph, that it takes some time. So anyway, we go on a little farther here, and Jacob sends Joseph out. His brothers are out herding the sheep, and here again, Joseph staying home. Why is Joseph at home when his brothers are out herding the sheep? Probably because he's his father's favorite.
That's right.
And he likes to have him around. So just send these other boys away, and I'll just keep Joseph around. So anyway, he sends Joseph out to check on his brothers. They're out, actually it says they were near Shechem, which, if you remember what happened at Shechem a couple of chapters before, when they slaughtered the whole town because of the king's son, who's actually, his name was Shechem. He raped their sister, Jacob's daughter, they wound up wiping out the whole town. So I'm surprised that they were anywhere near Shechem, but that's where they were. And so Joseph goes out looking for him and can't find him there. And a man sees him and tells him they went on to another place called Dothan. So he went on there and finds his brothers. Well, they see him coming. And of course, they're not going to do anything to Joseph while they're at home, because their father's not going to put up with that. But I mean, we're a long ways from home. I don't know how far this is away. I didn't look at it on a map to see exactly how far, but I get the impression that it's probably a day or two away from home, and they make up their mind.
It says here that Dothan is located about 13 miles north of Shechem.
Okay, but they weren't at Shechem.
Oh, no, they weren't.
That's where they went, or Joseph went first with Shechem. But anyway, they're quite a ways away. It's, when I say a couple of days, we're talking about walking. We're not talking about driving a car. Might have been an hour's drive, but an hour's drive can be 2 or 3 days walking. But anyway, whatever the condition, they're away from home, and they get this bright idea. Let's just kill this kid. I mean, he's a nuisance. We don't like him. We hate him, and well, let's just read what it says. Here comes that dreamer, they said to each other. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. Kind of hard for those dreams to come true if he's dead. And so these are his brothers, and they're wanting to kill him. I mean, I've gotten pretty mad at I have three brothers, grew up with 3 brothers, and there were times I got pretty upset with them, and probably more times they got upset with me.
But they never wanted to kill you.
Well, at least they never said it anyway. And I know I never wanted to kill them. Sometimes I wanted to whip them a little, whip up on them, but not kill them. But they're ready to kill him, and they're just going to throw him in a cistern, which just a hole in the ground where they store water, rainwater, and just go home, tell Dad, lion got him, bear got him, he's gone. Reuben, he's a little smarter. He's apparently got a little smarter than the last incident when he slept with one of his father's concubines. And Reuben heard it, and he said he tried to rescue him from his hand. He said, let's not take his life. Just, don't shed any blood anyway. Just throw him into one of the cisterns here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him. So I think he knows he can't talk him out of killing him, but at least let's not kill him with our own hands. Let's just throw him in a cistern, and if he starves to death, well, that's not our fault. We didn't kill him. We just put him in a hole in the ground that he can't get out of. But Reuben's
a bunch of rascals.
That's true. But Reuben, he's gonna go back and rescue him and take him back to his father. So Reuben's a little bit more honorable than the rest of these rascals. So anyway, they do that. Joseph finally arrives, because they're planning all this as he's coming, from a distance. They could see him from quite a ways. They stripped this fancy robe off of him. They threw him into the cistern, and then they sat down to eat. Well, apparently Reuben wasn't there when maybe he had to go off and do something else. But anyway, as they're sitting down to eat, Joseph's in this hole in the ground, and along comes this caravan of this caravan of Ishmaelites. And Judah, he gets a bright idea. He says, you know what? What are we going to gain if we kill him? We won't get anything out of that. Let's make some money off of this. First of all, we'd have to cover up his blood. We'd have to lie about the fact that we killed him, or, lie about the fact how he died. But, if we don't kill him, we don't have to lie about it. So let's just sell him. Let's make some money off of him. So that's exactly what they do. They pull him out of the cistern, they sell him, and for 20 shekels of silver, and they took him off to Egypt.
You remember that the Ishmaelites were descendants of Ishmael.
Of Ishmael, right. So actually they're related here.
Yeah, they're related.
But anyway, Reuben returns. He comes to his sister and sees he's not there and says, he tears his clothes. He's all upset. He said, the boy isn't there. Well, what can I do now? And apparently they didn't bother telling Reuben what they did.
No.
They thought, maybe Reuben would tell Dad if he told him. So apparently they kind of convinced Reuben that, hey, a wild animal must have got in there and ate him,
So now they've added
so,
a lie.
Yeah, they've added a
on
lie
top
to
of
their other sin. So what they do, they had taken his coat off of him. So they slaughtered a goat, killed a goat, and smeared the blood all over it. And of course, in those days, they didn't have DNA, so there's no way you could tell the difference between human blood and goat blood. They took the coat back and told their dad, said, is this the coat you gave Joseph? And of course, he recognizes it. And of course, Jacob says he recognized it, and he said, it is my son's robe. Some ferocious animals devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces. And then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son many days. I believe he would have mourned for any of his sons, but especially Joseph, because, like I say, he's his favorite son. He's the only son of Rachel, who really loves, although Rachel's pregnant again, but right now Joseph's Rachel's only son.
So now they have lied about it. They've lied about this whole incident, lied to their father, and now they've tried to cover it up.
Yeah, but now it says all his sons and daughters come to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. Can you imagine trying to comfort somebody when first of all, he's not dead, and second of all, you're the one that sent him off. You're the one that caused him to be missing.
So
and
conspiracy.
How can they live with that guilt? I mean, I don't know. That's hard to understand.
Hard to imagine, isn't it?
Yeah, that they're living with this guilt. Their father's mourning, and he refuses to be comforted, and the sons.
Really
At
sad.
least all of them at Reuben. Maybe Reuben truly thinks he was eaten by a wild animal, but still he knows he was part of throwing him in the cistern and whatnot. And Jacob says, no, I won't be comforted. No, he said, I will continue to mourn until I join my son in the grave. And so his father wept for him. And meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard.
Yeah.
So, after all these big dreams and everything, all of a sudden now, he's not even near his family. How can his family bow down to him when he's not even near them, and now he's a slave? So, what's going to happen here? Well, we'll find out. But in the meantime, we have a little interlude here.
Yeah.
With Judah and Tamar. We've
Just stuck
talked
in the
about
middle
this
of all
before. This seemed like such a dysfunctional family. I mean,
Yeah.
Judah and Simeon go in and, after deceiving the Shechemites and tell them, well, if you men will all get circumcised, we'll let you, we'll become part of you and intermarry with your families and whatnot. Instead, when they're all sore from the circumcision, they go in and slaughter all the men and plunder the town, take all the goods and the women and the children. And of course, we talked about Reuben sleeping with one of his father's concubines, and now they've killed Joseph, or sold Joseph. We're planning on killing him. Sold Joseph. And like I say, they seem like such a dysfunctional family, and we're going to hear now about Judah. And Judah's of course, head of the tribe of Judah, out of which came Jesus.
That's right.
And yet Judah was not a saint. Judah was a bit of a rascal. In fact, where was it? I was thinking Judah was the one that Yeah, Judah was the one back in verse 26 of 37. Judah's the one said, let's sell Joseph. He's the one that come up with that idea of selling him into slavery. And now this is a little bit later. We don't know how much later, but Judah left his brothers. He went down to a different place, and he met he married a Canaanite woman, which again they weren't supposed to do. They weren't supposed to marry the Canaanites.
That's what Esau did.
Anyway, he married her. He had 3 sons named Onan, and Shelah. So they had 3 different sons.
Which never seemed to amount to anything. You never hear anything of them.
Well, except 2 of them God took them out.
Yeah.
It said Judah got a wife for his firstborn, Her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, this is verses 6 and 7 of 38. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death. He must have been a pretty evil guy for God to basically wipe him out.
Yeah.
And then Judah said to Onan, his second son, you need to sleep with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to raise up offspring for your brother.
Which was a custom.
This custom apparently started pretty early. This is even before the law, but if you remember, in the time of Jesus, this was still the custom because the Sanhedrin, the Sadducees, tried to trick Jesus by talking about a woman that married a brother. Well, there were 7 brothers. She married the oldest one, and he died without leaving a son. Well, their tradition was that the next brother would marry her and raise up sons for the first brother.
Yeah.
And in this case that the Sadducees were talking about, all 7 of them married her because each one died in turn, and asking whose wife she would be in the resurrection. And of course Jesus says you don't understand the scriptures. There's not giving marriage in the resurrection. But anyway, in this case he says you need to marry your sister-in-law and raise up sons for your brother. Well, he knew they would be his brother's sons. It said, well, in verse 9 it says, Onan knew that the child would not be his, so whenever he slept with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from providing offspring for his brother. He said, I'm not going to raise up sons for my brother. Why should I do that? Well, what he did in verse 10 says, what he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death too. So anyway, apparently Shelah is still pretty young yet. And so Judah just tells her, go back to your father's house, live there until my son Shelah grows up. But he doesn't plan to give him Shelah at all, or giving Shelah to her. He says he thought he may die too, just like his brothers.
Yeah.
So he's blaming all this on Tamar, when the truth is it was the brothers, it was the son's fault. It wasn't Tamar, but I think Judah's got it in his head that she's a jinx or something, 2 of my sons have married her and they both died, and I don't want to give her my 3rd son. So anyway, make a long story short, Judah's wife dies, and he goes, several years pass. Shelah grown up, and Judah hasn't called for Tamar to marry him, and so forth. So when she sees he's not being faithful to his promise, she goes to this area where Judah is, and she sets up a tent and puts on a veil and basically acts like a prostitute.
Yeah.
And Judah comes along, and of course Judah's not married now, and he's a widower, and that doesn't make excuses for using the services of a prostitute, but he does with his daughter-in-law Tamar, who he doesn't know who he is. And she says, well, what will you give me? And says, well, I'll give you a goat out of my flock. Well, how will I know that you'll do that?
Yeah.
Well, I'll give you my seal and my walking stick, my staff. And so she does that, and they have intercourse, and Judah goes off, and Tamar packs up her tent and goes back home, and Judah sends his friend with a goat to pay off, his debt to her. Well, he get there and she's not there. He asks one of the guys there in the town, where she went, and we don't know anything about it. We haven't seen any prostitute around here. So anyway, they decide, well, let's not make a big deal out of it. We don't want to bring shame on ourselves. So anyway, several months later, Judah gets word that Tamar, his daughter-in-law, is pregnant.
Yeah.
And so what's he say? Judah said, bring her out and have her burned to death. Now, do you see his double standard here?
Yeah, right.
I know you women,
sure
and
do.
if you got any women watching, I know you're probably thinking, we see this all the time, the double standard. Let's burn Tamar for having sex outside of marriage, but what about Judah? Because he's the one that was involved in it.
Yeah.
I was thinking of the woman in Jesus' day that they brought before Jesus and said, this woman was caught in the very act of prostitution.
Yeah.
Or of adultery rather.
Uh-huh.
Should we stone her? Where's the guy? You've probably heard people talk about this before. If they were caught in the act of it, where's the guy?
Yeah.
The law didn't specify just the woman. The law said, if you're caught in adultery, you be stoned.
They both get stoned.
But they just brought the woman. Well, here Judah's ready to kill Tamar because she played, as I said, she played the prostitute. But he doesn't think about the fact that he's been guilty of the same thing.
So male chauvinism goes back a long
way.
That's
Yes, that's nothing new. And the double standard.
Yeah.
So she comes out and she sends a message to Judah. Says, I'm pregnant by the man who owns thee, she said. And she added, see if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are.
Yeah.
Did you recognize these, Judah? Uh-oh.
That has your name on it?
Yeah. So Judah recognized him and said, she's more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah, I guess, the way he pronounced it, and he did not sleep with her again. So apparently he never did give her to Shelah to be a wife. It doesn't say, but anyway, she does have, actually has twins out of
yeah, she does.
Out of this liaisons with Judah. It says that she was giving birth. Well, let's read verse 27. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twins in her womb. As she was giving birth, one of them put out his hand so the midwife took a scarlet thread and tied it on his wrist and said, this one came out first. But when he drew his hand back, his brother came out. And she said, whoa, so this is how you've broken out. And he was named Perez, which somewhere I've got written down here.
Breakthrough. Means breakthrough.
Breakthrough? Okay, yeah, breakthrough or breaking out. And then the second son is Zerah, which means scarlet or brightness, of course, because he had the scarlet ribbon around his wrist. I mean, he reached out first, but then he pulled his hand back in, and Perez scooted out ahead of him, and then we have Zerah.
And we're going to find out later how important Perez is.
Yeah, actually, Perez is mentioned in the lineage of Jesus.
Yeah,
he's one of David's ancestors. He's one of Jesus' ancestors, and yet, how did he come about? He came about as an act of adultery, I guess you'd call it. Well, I don't know if it's adultery, since neither one were married. Judah was a widower, and Tamar was a widow, but they certainly weren't married, so it was certainly extramarital sex, and yet still Perez. So God doesn't blame the child for their parents.
No.
There was one time in history when a child that, as they used the term, was a bastard, was an illegitimate child. It was like they were just written off. They had no rights. They were scorned and so forth. Yeah. And well, really, it wasn't their fault. It's not the baby's fault.
No.
they have no control over how they're conceived. So
That's right.
we don't ever judge a person because of their ancestry or how they were conceived.
Yeah.
And God certainly didn't judge Perez because of the fact that he was born out of a illicit relationship. All right, well, let's go on a little bit longer. Let's go into chapter 39 and see how things are going with Joseph.
Back to Joseph.
Yeah, well, things are looking up. Joseph, he got sold to Potiphar, who was the captain of the Pharaoh's guard. The Lord was with Joseph. Verse 2, the Lord is with him. He prospered. He lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw the Lord was with him and the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of everything, or of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. So Joseph, he could have gotten bitter, he could have complained, he could have griped, he could have been a lazy servant, said, you know what, I'm here illegally, I'm not going to do anything, I'm going to, and whatever. But he said, you know what, I'm here, I may not like the situation I'm in, but I'm just going to make the best of it. I'm just going to do my best. Yeah. God blessed him. God blessed his master even, who's not a godly man. He's not a follower of God. He worships the Egyptian gods. And yet God blessed him too because of Joseph.
Gave him favor.
And so, gave him great favor with Potiphar. Yeah. So, man, things are looking up, and he's in charge of everything, and he just, it says in verse 6, so Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. Yeah. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate.
And his wife.
Yeah, well, his wife was, of course, off limits, but his wife apparently had a problem. Maybe Potiphar was gone a lot, or, who knows. He may have had to travel a lot for Pharaoh and so forth. But anyway, whatever, Pharaoh's wife takes a shine to Joseph. He says, where are we at here? Now Joseph, this is the end of verse 6. Now Joseph was well built and handsome. And after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, come to bed with me. I mean, she's pretty brazen, and no two ways about it, Come to bed with me. Yeah. And so, Joseph, he refuses. He said, with me in charge, my master doesn't concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he's entrusted to my care. No one's greater in this house than I am. My master's withheld nothing from me except you, because you're his wife. And how then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? So ultimately, he knows this is a sin against God. And he's not going to do it. He's an honorable man. But she keeps after him. And you realize, again, Joseph is just a teenager at this time. I don't know, he was 17 when this story started. I don't know how much longer this is, probably not all that much longer. So he may be 18 or 19 by now, but he's still a young, single teenager. And here is this woman, probably a beautiful woman, because, the captain of the guard, he's a high official with Pharaoh and probably has a very attractive wife. And she's willing and wanting to have a tryst with Joseph, and she keeps after him, and finally one day she gets so bold that when nobody else is around, she grabs him and tries to drag him into the bedroom. I mean, that's pretty bold. But of course, Joseph refuses, and it says he took off it. He left his cloak in her hand, and he ran out of the house. Well, I'm sure you've heard the old expression that hell hath no fury like a scorned woman, but apparently there's a lot of truth in that, because when that happened, why, she called all her household servants, said, "Look, this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came here to sleep with me, but I screamed. When he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." So now she's blaming Joseph. Joseph tried to rape me, when all the time she's the one that's been trying to seduce him. And Joseph has been the honorable one. And even when, like say, when she tried to drag him in, why he refused to go with her. And of course, when the master gets home, when her husband gets home, why she tells the same story to him. Well, he's going to believe his wife over Joseph. I mean, likes Joseph, but
But he's loyal. He's loyal
yeah,
to his wife.
he's loyal to his wife. And so Joseph gets thrown in prison. And things look like they're looking up. Now they're looking down. Now Joseph's thrown in prison. It says the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But
that's an
again,
interesting place to leave us.
Well, we're not quite through yet. We've got a little bit more. While Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him there. How can the Lord be with you in prison? Tell you what, the Lord is with you anywhere.
That's right.
We've done a lot of jail and prison ministry, and I've told those guys many times, I said, these iron doors and these bars may keep you in, but they can't keep God out.
No.
God goes wherever he's wanted, wherever
That's
he's
right.
invited.
That's right.
And so God can go into prisons, and I've seen him do it many times in the jail and the prisons. Men that were in there for all kinds of wicked things get their lives right and begin serving God. So the Lord was with him while he was in prison. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all that he had, those held in the prison.
Got favor everywhere
And he was made responsible for all that was done there. Now, I don't think they do that sort of thing today, but apparently he had more latitude back then and thought, hey, what the heck, Joseph, he's not going to try and escape or anything. I'll just put him in charge and I won't have to work so hard. It says the warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did.
This is incredible favor.
Yeah. But again, why would God do this? Because Joseph had a good attitude. He didn't gripe. He didn't complain. I mean, I'm sure he had moments, I'm not saying he was totally perfect in all this, but for the most part, he said, oh, again, God, I don't like this. I'm falsely accused. I didn't do anything to be in here, but Lord, all I can do is just make the best of it. And I'll just do what I can to make things better here in the prison. And I'll help the warden out. I'll do whatever I can.
Yeah.
And that's why God gave him such favor, I believe. He didn't gripe, he didn't complain, he didn't blame other people. He just did what he had to do, and he continued to honor God. And so, we may go through difficulties sometimes because of things that we do right even, and I think it's either 1st or 2nd Peter, one of them. Peter says, it's if you're gonna suffer for doing right, not for doing wrong. We don't want to. If you get in trouble, make sure it's for doing right, not for doing wrong. And there are people that do that. I mean, in China, people get thrown in prison for preaching the gospel. And Russia was before communism fell, was the same thing. In some Arab nation, Muslim nations, Islamic nations, you can be martyred. For what? For believing in the Lord Jesus Christ, for converting from Islam to Christianity. So just because you become a Christian doesn't mean that cuts out all the suffering. But we just continue serving God anyway.
And he never leaves us. He never forsakes us.
That's right.
He's always with us.
Always with us.
Just like he was always
with
with
Joseph as a slave. Now he's with Joseph as a prisoner.
Yeah.
And so what's going to happen here? We just don't know yet. So you gotta stay tuned to find out what happens to Joseph. Does he spend the rest of his life in prison? What happens here?
I'm telling you, reading the Bible is
I'm
like
sure most of you probably already
watching
know,
a
but
drama
yeah.
on TV or
Well,
something.
some of these are kind of like
Except
a
this is
soap
real.
opera, because
Yeah.
some of these guys, it's kind of nice to find somebody now that's really doing the right thing, you know. So
Yeah.
many of these guys that have messed up and lied and cheated and
Oh,
connived and
goodness.
deceived, and
Yeah.
here's a man that is been honest and honorable and not taking the easy route out. So anyway, we'll finish or not finish it. We probably won't finish it, but we'll continue on the saga of Joseph and find out what happens. So you stay tuned, and we just pray you have a good week
Yeah.
and that things go well with you.
God bless you all.
Be blessed. Amen. You know, if I get my remote to turn things off here.